All right, so you know how it is, right? You're trying to understand what's actually going on these days, trying to cut through all the noise and get to the real issues, especially when it comes to stuff that could seriously impact our future.
For sure.
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today, a deep dive into some serious concerns around religious freedom in America, looking ahead to 2025 and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. And specifically today, we're focusing on a document called Project 2025. We'll be looking at it through the lens of this article from TATANKA.
Okay.
It's called Adaptations.
Yeah.
One of Us, Religious Persecution in 2025 America.
Mm.
And this article really takes a critical look at this Project 2025 and raises some pretty significant questions about what it could mean, for religious minorities in the U.S. in the very near future.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge deal. So basically what we're doing here is we're trying to distill, all the most important takeaways from this TATANKA article so we can give you a clear and insightful understanding of what's at stake here.
Yeah.
When it comes to Project 2025 and its potential impact on religious freedom,
Yeah.
because we get it, right? Everyone's busy these days.
Oh, yeah.
You want to be informed, but you don't want to feel overwhelmed. So let's break this down.
Let's do it.
Okay, so first things first. What exactly is this Project 2025 that everyone's talking about?
Right. So this TATANKA article characterizes Project 2025 as a sweeping conservative policy blueprint. It's spearheaded by the Heritage Foundation, and it seems to align pretty closely with, Trump's, what they call the fascist agenda. It's presented as a plan to kind of restore America to a certain vision.
Okay.
But the article points out that civil rights advocates are starting to sound the alarm, particularly about what this could mean for the whole landscape of religious freedom in the country.
And that's where things get really interesting, I think.
Yes.
Maybe a little bit unsettling even. So one of the core concerns highlighted in the article is this idea that Christian nationalism could actually become, like a guiding principle for how the government operates. Right. TATANKA says that Project 2025 very explicitly promotes Judeo-Christian values as being central to American identity.
That's interesting.
And while that might sound kind of broad and inclusive at first glance, the article argues that this kind of rhetoric can actually have the effect of pushing aside, non-Abrahamic faiths and even secular beliefs altogether.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
It's basically positioning conservative Christianity as the default setting for the culture,
Yeah.
Which kind of makes you wonder, what are the less obvious implications of framing national identity through this particular lens, right?
Right. It's interesting to think about this term Judeo-Christian values. It seems broad on the surface, but it carries all this historical and political baggage with it too, right?
Oh, for sure.
Who gets to decide what those values actually are? And who feels inherently included or excluded by that framing, as the core of American identity?
Yeah.
And, it's not just about explicit policies. It's about those subtle messages that get sent about who truly belongs in the story of America.
Absolutely. And that ties directly into another big area of concern that the article brings up.
Okay.
Which is the potential weakening of the separation between church and state.
Right.
So TATANKA points out how Project 2025 seems to encourage more religious influence in public institutions.
Like what kinds of things?
Like endorsing prayer in public schools or allowing more religious displays on government property. And the worry here is that this could chip away at those protections that have always safeguarded, minority faiths from being forced to conform to the dominant religious views.
Right. And if we connect this back to, the bigger picture, this separation of church and state, it's often talked about in terms of, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment. And that separation has been a foundation of religious freedom in the U.S. right. It was designed to prevent the government from favoring one religion over others and to protect everyone's right to practice their own faith, or no faith without interference.
Right.
And so when that boundary starts to get blurred, it can create an environment where that dominant religious viewpoint ends up getting preferential treatment.
Exactly.
And that can marginalize minority faiths in the public sphere.
Absolutely. And we've seen this play out historically in debates around things like, school prayer and religious symbols on public land and all that.
Oh, for sure.
So it's a very real concern. Now, another issue the article brings up, and this is a big one, is the potential for discriminatory immigration policies.
Okay.
It describes how some of the proposed immigration reforms would prioritize applicants who are deemed culturally compatible.
culturally compatible. Now, what does that even mean?
Right, it's vague. And the article suggests that this is often a way of referring to people from Christian majority nations.
Hmm.
And when you read that, what are some of the immediate implications that come to mind?
Well, it raises a huge question about, who is seen as actually fitting into the American fabric.
Right.
The article suggests that this prioritization based on, cultural compatibility,
Right.
while it doesn't explicitly say anything about religion, could act as this kind of discriminatory filter,
Yeah.
potentially restricting access for people from Muslim, Hindu, or Buddhist regions,
Right, yeah.
people who are fleeing persecution and seeking refuge in the U.S.
Yeah, it's like it implies a preference for certain religious backgrounds, even if it's not directly stated.
Exactly. And the
Yeah.
fact that there's no clear definition for what cultural compatibility actually means,
Right.
that's really concerning
Oh, yeah.
because it leaves room for all sorts of subjective and potentially biased interpretations.
Oh, for sure. Okay, another significant point that TATANKA brings up is this potential reshaping of the federal workforce based on religious beliefs.
Ooh, okay. How so?
So Project 2025 apparently outlines plans to overhaul the federal bureaucracy with the goal of installing people who are considered ideologically aligned, often those who hold conservative Christian values.
Okay.
And the worry here is that this could lead to the creation of what are essentially religious litmus tests,
Right.
potentially putting qualified individuals from minority faiths at a disadvantage when it comes to getting hired or even just keeping their jobs in the federal government.
Yeah, I see what you mean. That's a huge issue.
Yeah. And what does that say about, equal opportunity in public service?
Well, exactly. I mean, if religious affiliation or aligning with a specific set of religious values becomes like a deciding factor in hiring and promoting federal employees,
Right.
then you can end up with a workforce that doesn't reflect the diversity of the nation's religious makeup at all.
Yeah.
And, does everyone feel represented and served by such a bureaucracy?
Mm-hmm.
That's a question we have to ask.
Mm.
Historically, civil service reforms were meant to shift away from patronage and towards merit-based systems.
Mm-hmm.
And this proposal seems like it could potentially reverse that in a whole new way.
Yeah, for sure. And this brings us to another area of concern that the article highlights.
Okay, what's that?
Concerns about the potential privileging of religious schools through expanded voucher programs.
Okay.
So these programs would basically funnel public money into religious private schools, a significant number of which are Christian affiliated.
Mm-hmm.
And the article points out that these institutions often operate under doctrines that can be exclusionary.
Right.
And in some cases, they can legally discriminate against students and staff who don't adhere to their religious beliefs.
Yeah, that's a really tricky issue.
Yeah, it is. So what are your thoughts on the potential ripple effects of such a policy shift?
Well, I think it raises this really critical question about, how public funds are used in education.
Mm-hmm.
While proponents of voucher programs often talk about, parental choice and
Right.
creating competition within the education system,
Right.
the concern here is that taxpayer money could end up supporting institutions that don't uphold these basic principles of non-discrimination, and that they might actively promote very specific religious viewpoints to the exclusion of others.
Yeah.
This could disproportionately impact students and staff from minority religious backgrounds,
Mm-hmm.
potentially limiting their educational and employment opportunities.
Sure.
It raises these broader questions about the separation of church and state when it comes to education, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And the TATANKA article goes beyond just the formal institutions like schools and government
Okay.
and talks about this potential marginalization of non-Christian expression in just everyday public spaces. The concern is that if Christianity kind of becomes the de facto religion, in public life,
Right.
then those minority expressions, everything from wearing a hijab or a turban to, public Hindu or pagan ceremonies, could face more stigmatization or even suppression.
Yeah, I mean, that's a chilling thought.
It is. How do you see such a shift impacting the daily lives of people who practice minority faiths?
Well, this gets to the heart of religious freedom,
Yeah.
It's not just about the right to hold beliefs privately.
Right.
It's about the freedom to practice and express those beliefs openly and publicly
Yeah,
without fear of, discrimination, harassment, or social pressure.
absolutely.
And a shift towards, a perceived or actual religious norm could create this environment where visible expressions of minority faiths are met with discomfort, suspicion, or even hostility.
Mm-hmm.
And, people might start to self-censor or feel like second-class citizens.
Yeah, it's a very real concern. And speaking of concerning, the article raises another somewhat unsettling point regarding the potential for increased surveillance of religious minorities.
Oh, okay.
It notes that expanded national security powers could broaden profiling and surveillance, particularly targeting, Muslims, Sikhs, and other communities that have historically been disproportionately affected by law enforcement,
Right.
especially in the context of counterterrorism efforts.
Right, yeah.
So what are the inherent dangers in this kind of expansion of surveillance powers?
Well, this is one of those really sensitive areas where the need for national security can unfortunately clash with fundamental rights like religious freedom and privacy.
Yeah.
And the article highlights a very legitimate concern that these broad surveillance powers, even when they're intended to address real security threats, can be disproportionately applied to and stigmatize certain religious communities.
Right.
Just based on historical biases, stereotypes, or, perceived associations.
Right.
And that can create this chilling effect on their religious practice and their ability to participate in civic life.
Yeah.
It really underscores how important it is to make sure that national security measures are implemented in a way that respects and protects the civil liberties of all citizens.
Absolutely, regardless of their religious beliefs.
Exactly.
Okay. And finally, the TATANKA article delves into this very complex issue of redefining religious liberty in a way that could actually enable discrimination.
Oh, wow.
It explains how, under the guise of religious freedom, policies might allow individuals or institutions to refuse services in areas like healthcare, housing, or employment based on their religious objections. And this often has a disproportionate impact on LGBTQ+ individuals and religious minorities. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this touches on a real tension in how we understand religious freedom in a diverse society. I mean, the right to exercise one's religion freely is fundamental.
Absolutely.
But the concern raised here is that when that right is interpreted so broadly that it allows people or institutions to impose their religious beliefs on others,
Right.
then it can lead to harm and discrimination against vulnerable groups.
Yeah.
And the article rightly points out that this could disproportionately affect LGBTQ+ individuals and religious minorities who might be denied essential services or equal treatment simply because of someone else's religious objections.
It's a really important point.
It is, and it highlights this ongoing debate about where the boundaries of religious freedom lie
Yeah.
when they intersect with other fundamental rights.
For sure.
The principle of non-discrimination.
Absolutely. So we've talked about a lot of concerns here, but it's important to note that the TATANKA article doesn't just present these concerns.
Okay.
It also outlines a proactive response to these potential shifts. They call it a quiet rebellion of peace, asserting that, the time for words alone has passed. And they've launched this initiative, Project 2025, a quiet rebellion of peace.
Okay.
And they've even provided a link for people to learn more about it.
Okay, what's the link?
It's http://p25.site.
Okay.
And their aim is to counteract division, fear, and injustice, not through, aggressive opposition, but through this unwavering commitment to love.
Interesting. So how are they putting that into action?
Well, that's what's really interesting here.
Yeah.
They're emphasizing music-cultural fusion and collective action, which they refer to as DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, all grounded in the belief that only love can truly dismantle its power.
A powerful message.
It is, and this initiative offers a really compelling perspective. It goes beyond just identifying the problems and actually seeks to build bridges of understanding.
Yeah.
And foster community through cultural and communal engagement.
Right.
It's a different kind of response that focuses on positive action and connection.
It is.
And it's pretty inspiring. So for our listeners, this information that we've explored from the TATANKA article, it provides a really crucial understanding of the potential shifts that are happening in American society.
Absolutely.
Whether you're interested in social dynamics, public policy, human rights, these are vital connections to be aware of. It's like those aha moments when you see how policy proposals could actually play out in the real world,
Right.
and impact individuals and communities with all sorts of different beliefs.
Yeah, exactly. Understanding these potential implications, allows us to be more informed and engaged citizens and to have a deeper appreciation for the delicate balance that's needed to uphold religious freedom in a diverse and pluralistic society.
So just to kind of recap everything,
Okay.
based on our deep dive into this TATANKA article, There are some significant concerns being voiced about Project 2025 and its potential impact on religious minorities in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
The article raises the possibility of Christianity being favored, de facto, a weakening of that separation of church and state, and the creation of pathways for discrimination, all under this banner of religious freedom.
Right.
And it makes you think.
What are you thinking?
Considering all this, what are some of the less obvious ways that this shift towards prioritizing one religious viewpoint could really impact the daily lives and sense of belonging for people with different beliefs?
Mm-hmm.
In a society that, prides itself on religious freedom for all right.
Yeah.
It's not just about those overt acts of discrimination. It's about the more subtle ways in which a dominant cultural perspective can influence how people actually experience life.
Exactly.
How they're treated, how they feel about belonging here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something to really think about. And we definitely encourage you to check out TATANKA's Quiet Rebellion of Peace at that link we mentioned.
Yeah, http://p25.site.
To see one concrete example of how people are responding to these potential concerns.
Right, and to think about, what role individual awareness and action can play in navigating these potential shifts in society.
Yeah, and ultimately it all comes back to this,
What's that?
Understanding diverse perspectives and critically examining how policy proposals could impact fundamental rights.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's crucial for building and maintaining a society that truly lives up to that ideal of religious freedom for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for diving into this with me.
Of course, anytime.
To all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in and keep those critical thinking caps on.
Absolutely, stay engaged.
We'll catch you in the next deep dive.
See you then.